What up, everybody? It's your boy, Kata Don.
And I'm Natika.
And we have a very special Love First podcast. We have someone from our political panel. We have our favorite Republican in the building, international journalist, and Mr. Steve. How you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Yes, and Steve came to fight today.
Yep.
He wants revenge for the red wave.
I got my brass knuckle here.
For real. No, we're glad to have you on. We actually have a lot of important conversations to talk about today. I would like to kick it off, especially having you in here, right? We have a lot of listeners, some lean left, some lean right. I'm independent myself, but I do have questions that I want to know the conservative viewpoint from it. Now, obviously, you can't talk for every conservative in the world, but I just want to get a general understanding of why we've seen like support in certain areas for certain things, right?
Yeah.
So starting with the Supreme Court, right? They recently ruled against affirmative actions in the college, right? So that's one of the things that, you know, the right side really seems to be supportive of, that, you know, they wanted to get rid of. So my question is, like, what is the mindset behind it? And then I might have certain questions that might be a kind of pushback to it, but I'm just curious, why do you agree with it? And if so, why is it important?
Well, first of all, I saw a poll that showed most Americans agree with it. So if you look at the majority of Americans, they have been moving against affirmative action. And it's one of those tough situations because it gets emotional and it involves people that are not part of my group that is effective. In this particular case, it was Asians who were fighting against discrimination against them, and it dealt with I believe it was Harvard, right? And the whole affirmative action situation. So what did Martin Luther King say? He said, "Do not be judged by the color of your skin, by the content of your character." And when it comes to education and in other walks of life, whether it's for employment, whether it's applying to be a pilot or a doctor, I mean, it affects every type of school. Do you want people to get in because of merit or strictly because of an immutable characteristic like race or color of skin? So the conservative point of view is essentially, let's stop judging people by race and color, but by content of character and by merit. Of course, the issue is making up for past discrimination. The conservative justice that Ronald Reagan put up, Sandra Day O'Connor, she said in 2003, where she was one of the deciding votes to keep affirmative action, she said in 25 years, hopefully, we would not have to have affirmative action anymore, meaning we're going to hopefully be at a place in society where we don't have to discriminate against anybody and just judge people based on their skills and test scores and other factors.
Okay, so my biggest pushback on that, right? If we talk about, you know, not being judged. So the reason affirmative action, and I feel like we also need to get kind of like statistics, right? Because I don't believe that affirmative action kind of put people in Harvard because they were a certain color and they didn't qualify. Like, they didn't meet the criteria of what it takes to get into the school. And after they graduated, you know, they weren't successful and prosperous and, you know, and did things. So I believe that the biggest thing it was there for is because when you have a minority group, it's like these people aren't even looking. It's like people were getting judged to not get in because of that, or they were not being sought after or found or whatever the case may be, but the numbers were extremely wrong. And when you have, and what America is based on is, when you have a minority group, we're basically saying your voice still wants to be heard. For example, in the American system, we have the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is pretty much made the numbers work that states that might not have a big population actually have a decent number on the Electoral College scale, so that America just can't make decisions and they're not accounted for at all. So my biggest pushback, again, when we bring it back to the affirmative action, is it's not like people didn't qualify and then after that they weren't successful. So that's kind of like my only issue with that. And then the second thing on that would be the number one thing, which I don't think that people are fighting, which is crazy, is legacy admissions, right? Way more than affirmative action is we have a lot of people that their parents graduated from their school, their parents donated to the school, and their kids are getting in based off that. And a lot of these schools probably maybe wouldn't even have the funds they have if they weren't doing that, because most of their stuff is not coming from the government, it's not coming from tuition, it's coming from these donors, you know?
Right. Well, look, I think we have to accept life's not fair. People are going to have connections all the time. You know someone, right, a friend, maybe an enemy, right? You let them in your circle, you help them out. Colleges, they get a lot of money from people, and there is a legacy. That, to me, is about networking and connections. But if we're talking generally, if you're wearing blinders around your eyes and you're dealing with college admissions, at what point do you say, okay, let's stop judging in this manner and let's look at grades or extracurricular activities? And again, it's one thing to say you want to have diversity. It's one thing if you want to make up for the past. But at what point do you deal with discrimination by not having discrimination in another way? And that's really the problem.
So, all right, so again, another pushback, right? So you kind of started off saying, like, life isn't fair, but then literally they're taking this away to say we want to make it fair, right? But again, right, if it's a minority group, or we're talking about being listed off grades, if you have, like, I'm just throwing out random numbers, right? If you have 5 million of this type of people and you have 500,000 of these people, there's a chance that, hey, 2 million of these people, which is more than this population, could have the grades. So whether these people have the grades or not, we can find 2 million people from this big old group and ignore these people that have the grades to get in.
But at what point do you say, let's stop looking at things in that way? At what point do you say, enough, we're supposed to sort of be colorblind?
Yeah. Well, I would say the point would, to me personally, what I'd like to see is maybe we could have been stricter with affirmative action. Like, let's actually, because no one's talking record and statistics, and I personally don't have them here today. Yeah. But like, let's see these people that got in for affirmative action, do they have the same grades as these students that were getting in? Do they have the same qualifications? Because it should not be used for someone of a different color just to get in and get a free pass. But it should be used so a group is not ignored.
Right. No, and that's fair enough. But I think a lot of times these institutions are looking to have a check mark in, and they're looking to have, let's have a certain percentage here, and they ignore whether someone from another group who's considered maybe privileged, or they didn't want as many Asian people to keep their population down, for example, and so they stopped looking at their grade. So in a sense, that is unfair as well. It's really difficult to make up for the past, which is why, as I say, even conservatives like Sandra Day O'Connor said she's voting for affirmative action to continue now, but not forever necessarily. She said in 25 years, which would have been, in 28, right?
Yeah. And look, and like I said, we can't solve it today, but what I would like to see from mainstream media out there too is, let's see statistics, right? Instead of saying these people, like, I just want to see these people that got in, how are they not qualified? How are they qualified? Let's talk more statistics. But like, and again, we have this platform because we don't all have to think the same to have love for each other. Like, I got love for you, and we obviously have different opinions on this spectrum. Now, I would say,
I have to say, I would like to see more short Jews on basketball teams, right? So
but look, are they going to put up the same points? If we putting up the same points, you know what I mean? And we're just getting overlooked. We're putting up the same points.
No.
If y'all not putting up the points.
But well, maybe someone could hold them up. Y'all
want something beyond affirmative action.
But I totally agree. But the criticism is that they're not looking at the points, that there's a curve. And I have to say it hurts people because a lot of times if the assumption in the mind is, oh, they got in only because of their color, then it's unfair to someone who's worked hard, probably has to work doubly hard to prove that I earned my spot and it wasn't given to me. And society, in terms of that, it hurts society because it creates resentment, it creates more division, and it creates thoughts of, oh, they had a benefit, but why not me? So I think those are deeper issues that are involved.
Yeah, and my perspective, and I want to give you a chance to talk to, but just and this will be my last thing on the topic. But just my perspective on that, it's just unfortunate that it's another minority group is the one that brought this to the Supreme Court, right? That fought it, and they felt like the biggest way for them to get in was to come for the other minority group instead of, you can't go for legacy admissions. There's too much money. No one's going to say, we're going to stop accepting donations. We're going to stop letting people buy their children's way in, which is really the right thing. But I feel like that's not going to happen. So one minority group came at this part and it's like, hey, listen, we could probably get in if we get this small group out because this is easier to get out than necessarily coming for that. But is there anything you want to say before we go to the next?
Yes. Affirmative action, I feel like people just think about it as, you're giving a preference to a certain race and then you're not looking beyond that. Because when people apply for something, like let's say it's a grant, let's say it's a scholarship or getting into college or something, like you have to tell your story, right? And whenever people are considering, like people on the admissions are considering your application, they're looking into a bunch of factors. And historically speaking, African Americans, Hispanics, Jewish people, they have been underrepresented and undervalued, and there's been a lot of hurdles, societal hurdles, that have prevented people from trying to move forward. Same thing with women and all that stuff. And affirmative action, while at the moment you might see that this person is like, oh, okay, maybe they have lower grades than, like, let's say a white person coming from like a legacy family. You have to think about the long-term effects of how affirmative action benefits people, right? So I think about it in terms of me personally, right? I have benefited from affirmative action in a way that I look back now, and I got a scholarship in college, like a full ride, right? And it might not have been like explicit, like we are considering women or considering Latinas or something like that, but because these things were put into place, I benefited from these things. Because of that, I don't pay for student loans. I'm not struggling with student loan debt. I had applied for a grant in like 2021, and in that application, they specified that there was some of the funds being allocated towards female musicians, things like that, and like I benefited from that. And while other people might have already that advantage from coming from a family with money, there are people who just don't have that, right? And you have to look into, that person has a drive. That person wants to obviously succeed. And the people that are coming from a more privileged, a place where they have more money or they have more resources, like they'll find another way. They're going to be okay, But the people who are benefiting from affirmative action, you're not going to see the result of that in like immediately. You're going to see that later on. And
remember that case where someone bribed, I think it was an athletic director,
yes,
right? And I think
all of Hollywood. It was like all of these celebrities, like Felicity Huffman, and I'm trying to remember who else.
Oh yeah, from Full
the
House,
girl
right?
who played is on Full House. Yeah. And then they all went to jail because it was like they just, people just took their word for it from that one athletic director and then just went ahead and they like benefited from that. Like
So when will the Bidens go to jail? Right?
Yeah.
Look at all.
Listen, we're gonna get to Biden.
That's like a whole other conversation. But like
he said, hold on, we're coming to the Biden. We're gonna get to the Biden.
Those legacy admissions is just another example of nepotism. Just like you were pointing out, like those, like all of those celebrities who just use their connections to just do that.
When I come around, I wanna see smile. Don't cry when I come around, I wanna see smile. You could call me daddy, 'cause I'll always be here to hold you tight in my arms and protect you. You could call me daddy, arms to protect you.